Hello, Gil. It's such a pleasure to have you with me today in this interview, and thank you so much to make the time for this.
Adriana, it's a privilege.
Well, we have a lot of things to talk about because I see you did so many things from very young age. So I think we will have so many interesting things. And I want to ask you first, can you say something about who you are, your affiliation? And the first thing I want to talk about is also what is your current most engaging initiative related to psychoanalysis and the state of the world?
As you know, I am 94 years old, and I am still very fully engaged. I have cut back. I am only working 7 days a week. I don't work nights anymore. And my principal engagements are twofold. One, I am developing a social justice division at Harlem Family Services, a nonprofit agency in New York City. And 7 or more psychoanalysts are working under my leadership and with my supervision to provide social justice through litigation on behalf of traumatized people, often children who have been neglected, maltreated, and whose traumatic experiences are really the fault of a social system, such as a foster care system, or an educational system, a school, or a church. So I feel as a psychoanalyst, I'm using my skills to listen, understand, report, and communicate to a jury or at a deposition about what has gone wrong and whose responsibility it is. Often it is our responsibility as citizens, taxpayers, who are supporting faulty, negligent, inattentive systems that allow children not only to be sexually abused or beaten, but sometimes to be killed. So I do have to do sometimes psychological autopsies to determine whether there were people or agencies responsible for failing to keep the child well or even alive. In addition, I am disseminating an invention of mine, which is a method of treatment called reflective network therapy. It is a psychoanalytic application in the real life classroom of special needs preschoolers, those with autism or with traumatic experiences. And to the credit of psychoanalysis, it is evidence-based. So we are showing that intelligence quotient increases remarkably and with great regularity using this method in contrast to non-analytic methods. So I'm very pleased and very psychologically invested in researching, documenting, disseminating, writing about this method.
Yes, I think what you are describing is something that is so beneficial to children, to families, and to the world, and also to psychoanalysis for us to think. And I'm thinking, you were working with this for a long time. And I want to ask you, in the state the world is now, the violence and all the difficulties, you were doing a lot as a psychoanalyst. I don't know if you want to talk about also some other thoughts that you have, how psychoanalysts can contribute to the world in this state?
Well, it is a natural thing for psychoanalysts to take a leadership role in thinking about the nature of mankind. How is it we can be so cruel to each other in Israel and in Gaza? How can we kill children in foster care here in the United States? How is it that we can sexually use children to their great detriment? How is it we adults do such things to each other's futures? That is, it is a way really of killing our own species. And yes, I've given a lot of thought to that, and I believe psychoanalysis has something to contribute, not all by itself, because it is partly an evolutionary, sociologic, biologic, as well as, unfortunately, a psychological matter. But we must think about it. I'm so proud to be part of the think tank on intractable conflicts because we have the courage there to criticize our own selves, our own species, and our own profession for the terrible things that we allow ourselves to do.
Mhm. And you work so much in this field, and I was wondering, how was your background influenced your approach to all your initiatives? And also, in which way maybe you can talk about your heritage from your family and about yourself, your history that influenced in all this.
Well, yes, let me share a picture or two with you to help answer your question. This is a picture of all of my great grandparents in Ukraine sometime around 1900. Aunts, uncles, great grandparents, and they were all killed before I was born.
Mhm.
That had a great influence on me, even though I never saw that picture until I was 35 years old. And I never knew that at that time that the murders of my relatives happened in Ukraine, that my grandmother, Rebecca, learned about it by a letter, and she fell mute. For 3 months, she did not speak. And this must have had a great impact on my mother, her child. And I later learned, as I was educating my children about their family history and hearing about it from elders, I learned that my mother had an older brother who died on the way to the United States. My parents, both my parents, were born here in the United States, but the death of all those relatives and the later many in concentration camps must have a tremendous intergenerational impact on me as the first grandchild to be alive in the United States. I was not well. I had, as you can see, my face is all beaten up here.
Oh.
I had probably just emerged from surgery, and I had many surgeries on my head. My mastoids were operated upon before there was such a thing as an antibiotic. So you can imagine the anxiety of my grandparents on both sides from Ukraine, my mother and father, who knew the history that I didn't know, and thought, well, maybe we are going to lose our first child, our first grandchild. And I think this continued, this surgical journey of mine continued till I was at least 4. So I had many surgeries, of which I can remember some with great fear. I had much terror of being anesthetized, held helpless, and it was a template of a traumatic nature, which I think made me very sympathetic and empathetic with children of preschool age, because I was of that age when I was terrified. And my terror was not understood or well responded to by my parents, who instead expected a great deal of me. So I became, in many ways, the intellectual leader and the parent to my parents. A very precocious, very intellectually active child who was probably used in that way as the leader of the family and the great hope. So I was fed books very early about Pasteur and Semmelweis and Einstein and Koch and Lister. I knew all of those things. I even could explain to adults a little bit about the theory of relativity if I wanted to distract them, like in a dental office. I would try to control the situation through my intellect. And early on, I realized that there was something else terrible happening in my family, as my father had a post-traumatic stress disorder and would awake screaming from terrible nightmares. And if I came in to see what was going on with this screaming, he would explain to me that his dead mother was angry at him in his dream because he had not been able to buy radium for him, for his mother, who was dying of metastatic carcinoma and needed radium that he could not buy. I did not know, and he did not know, that we had a genetic disorder which would pervade my life. It would plague me and my children, and many members of my family died around me, including one of my boys. And another boy has a similar genetic problem. And I have had to survive many cancers, which were literally metastatic. And even to this day, I am a victim of metastatic carcinoma and combat it. And fortunately, it has not yet apparently gone to my brain or my lungs, but I can function. And I carry on as I did in childhood by being an intellectual leader, an inventor, a creator, a source of wisdom to the beleaguered family. I was in college by the time I was 15, and I had become an expert in protozoology and microscopy and chemistry, and was a prodigious child, but at great psychological expense, which still is costly to me, as I still am on a mission. All my life seems to be a mission for the generations behind me.
Wow, that is really very impressive, Gil, because I think how you could sublimate all this and transform death into life and transform fear into hope. And when you said, well, your parents were expecting so much from you, and I thought, wow, you exceeded all the expectations with transforming all this suffering in something so beneficial for you and for the world also, no, with your own experience. So thank you for sharing this. I think it's really an amazing example of how you can transform something that is painful in something that is so beneficial, no? It's and maybe you want to, I would like to know also, well, you are implying why you wanted to be a doctor with all what you are saying, doctor and a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. Maybe you want to say more about that. What took you to study what you did?
Well, my father was an uneducated man in many ways, but he was a brilliant businessman in some ways. And he read widely. He was an advertising genius. For example, he advertised Omega watches. And when the astronauts went to the moon, he was sure that they took an Omega watch to the moon so that he could advertise that successfully, and did so on the back page of the New York Times magazine section for many years. But when he was telling me about his guilty dreams, he didn't stop there. He tried to help me understand what guilt was. And of all the things you can imagine a father did, you would not guess that that father gave me a 3-volume set of the works of Freud to read.
Wow.
I was 7 years old, and he gave me Karen Horney also because he was apparently a liberated man. So early on, I learned with pride how to spell psychiatry and psychoanalysis, and showing that off to grown-ups. My fate was sealed. I had to become, well, in those days, you had to be a physician, so I became a doctor. So I complied in a way with the hopes of my family to be a physician. And I always studied psychiatry in medical school, even published before I finished my internship. I was publishing on catecholamines, which, as you know, are the hormones of fear. And I had plenty of fear.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah, but wow, what you did with your fear, no? I think your fear was helpful. It was.
Well, I converted the passive into active, and I became a risk taker. And I flew very complex aircraft, and at times I would fly over the Andes to start a preschool to carry out my invention of reflective network therapy in Argentina, where we had a very good preschool run by a psychoanalyst named Alicia Mayo, who studied with me. But en route, I became a very skilled pilot. It was a very technical matter. I flew for 4,600 hours, which is a lot of time. And with the airplane, I was able to work in many settings, but my interests were apparently in disaster. So my first artistic work, you can see here my first oil painting of many I did, was of a disaster. A hurricane struck a beach, and I was interested in painting it. But I was also interested in being Lucy, who provides, as you may know in the comic book, she provides low-cost psychiatric help just for 5 cents in the Snoopy. So my work in therapeutic preschools was intended for children who could not afford it. The interest in exploration was very intense on my part. I had great curiosity, and together with one of my boys, I discovered a city, a lost city in the Yucatan, and here I'm flying over it. You can see this is at Boca de la Iglesia, the site of the first landfall of a Spanish expedition in the Yucatan. And my now deceased boy and I discovered it by air, and then we went by land, and it has become a national park now. The Mexican government gave us credit for it. So it's been an exciting life to become really the master of gravity, the master of distance and space, and not to be the helpless, traumatized child, but rather to help others who've been traumatized.
You know, Gil, when you are talking about your flights, when you were flying in your plane, and I thought how impressive that is. You flew for so many places. You went, over Los Andes and other places. And I thought how beautiful is that metaphor of you flying, going, flying very high in your work and being able to see things from a perspective from above, looking at what you can do. And I know you developed this technique. I would like to know if you can describe the technique you developed, the reflective network therapy. Maybe we can learn from that technique.
It is having special needs children, those with autism or trauma or other disorders like oppositional disorders, anxiety, and attention deficits, taking them into a classroom, no more than 8 or 10 children in a classroom with 2 teachers, and involving the parents to come in at first before the children are comfortable and help them separate, then to meet with the parents every week and share information about what happened in the classroom and what happened at home for an hour every week with the teacher or with the therapist. And something very special happens in the classroom. The teacher has to brief the analyst. Before the analyst talks with any child, she tells him or her what happened with that child that morning and what she knows about the child that week from the parent. This takes just a minute or two to say, And then there is a play therapy session in the classroom with whatever the child wants to do in the classroom. And that is interpreted if possible and if appropriate. Then at the end of a 20-minute play therapy session, the child and the analyst debrief to the teacher and tell the teacher what they've been playing about and what the analyst thought about it. And the child will correct and add, and other children may say something like, "Oh, you forgot to say he threw a block at me." Then this happens every day. So that's in a 40-week year, that's 160 briefings, 160 play therapy sessions, 160 debriefings, and 40 parent guidance sessions. So there's a lot of consistency. Attendance is excellent. The children hardly ever don't come. And we learn an immense amount. Usually we have a videotape that we study every week as a conference. And of course, we do IQ testing and other testing before the treatment starts and a year later. And we've had some amazing results. We now have some 33-year follow-ups and even 60-year follow-ups. And some of the children have become brilliant.
Wow, Gil, this really makes me think of how much we can work as psychoanalysts outside our offices and how big effect, how big results we can have as psychoanalysts in the social environment. No, this made this network of the parents, the other children, the teacher, which make it so rich, no?
Yes,
And
it is
yeah,
a mentalizing network in the community.
yeah.
And it is very powerful.
You know, I'm thinking how important would be to learn this in the institutes, in the IPA institutes, because I think we need to learn how we can also act more outside also our offices as psychoanalysts, not only in our offices, which of course is what we do, but this kind of work has such a big impact in the social environment, not in the social life. So,
Yes, well, this particular method is very close to what we do in our offices, but it is entirely in a different setting.
yes. And I'm thinking how it's different, you know, it's similar and different, but maybe only psychoanalysts can do that kind of work because you need to understand what is happening there and, you know, in a deep way to be able to do such a work, no?
Well,
So,
I think psychoanalysts do it best amongst the over 30 people who have carried it out. But people who are not psychoanalysts also have succeeded because the children are so ready to play and talk, and the teachers are such good observers and regulators of the children's impulses. So the premium is on mentalization and sublimation, which promotes learning, reduces anxiety, and improves social adaptation greatly. So I have the hope actually that I could teach this to teachers' aides who could do this if they dedicated themselves to it. And that's my next project, is I'm seeking several $1,000,000 now to train teachers' aides to be the people's therapists. So it would be like Freud thought, the people's clinics. We have to bring this relational way of helping children emerge from autism and from trauma into a mentalized world. And who better than a teacher to do that if the teacher is willing to relate? As in all the studies I have done for all these decades on so many videos, it seems to me it is the warm, affectionate relationship between the child and the adults in the classroom that causes the emergence of the intelligence and social abilities of the child. It is not so much the interpretation, but that helps a lot.
And I think I totally agree with you when you say, well, it's not only psychoanalysis. I can, when I thought of psychoanalysis, maybe it's more the way a psychoanalyst can think, which can also be done by someone else, but it's a psychoanalytic way of thinking in the sense of what is happening that you don't see, what is happening behind words and actions, no? So I think it's important
Yes.
to
Yeah.
a team, no, doing it.
And it's important that analytically derived therapies be given good research opportunities. So, for example, if I train 50 um, teachers' aides, they could treat 500 or 1,000 children within a year or two. And we could show, I think, that compared to applied behavioral analysis or similar methods like Denver Early Start, we could save taxpayers millions and millions and millions of dollars while saving the hearts and minds of hundreds and thousands of children with this analytic method. So I think taxpayers should be supporting psychoanalytic research of this nature. And that is part of my future planning.
Wow. I see also you have a lot of influence from very important child analysts. You said, well, in when you were training, this supervision you had, and also you said you were in contact with Anna Freud. And I was wondering who, if there are other analysts, child analysts, or other analysts that you feel made a strong influence in your work.
Looking back, I would think I have been encouraged by Augusta Alpert, who believes that object relations therapy can be very profoundly effective. I have been influenced in the negative by Martha Wolfenstein, who I had a great controversy with because I thought children could mourn very early and could be greatly helped by the process of mourning. And she believed the opposite. And, Berta Bornstein has been a good influence on me. Peter Fonagy and Mary Target in their work on following the effects of child analysis have been influential to me.
I was thinking when you are talking also about the bad influence, and I think, well, those are very helpful because those make you think a lot and make you know what you don't want to do, not only what you want to do. So that is it's helpful also. And I was thinking it's similar, like a parallel with all the illnesses and the medical problems you had that were also influencing you in a way that made you also helping you create and develop so many things, no? Because you had to
Yes.
go through one.
Yes. Yeah, I think, I came very close to dying a number of times. And I think that is an experience of a very potentially positive existential nature. So I think of that now. I realize I am fragile. I would love, for example, to travel with my wife, Harriet, but I am uh, thinking it's not wise for me to travel very much. So instead, I devote myself to this mission. And fortunately, she believes in my mission.
I'm sure she does. I think she, values you every step you do. And it's impossible not to do it, but I know how much she values everything you do. And I was wondering if you wrote about dying. I think I would love to read something that if you wrote something about dying, death, from your own experience. It's like dying and rebirthing many times. You have a lot to say about that.
Well, that's true. No, I have not specifically written about that, but you can see there's an article I wrote in the American Psychoanalyst about being unlucky and lucky, and
Yes, I thought.
I think the sense of having defied death and overcome what was a close call a number of times is very good. I think the worst of it was once I was in the hospital for 28 days without being able to eat, and I was being fed artificially. And I think it was important. I was clear minded that I would like to live. It would have been easy to give up, but I didn't want to give up.
When you said that you are fragile, and now you say, well, you didn't want to give up, and I thought, when you said you are fragile, I thought, oh, I wish I could be so fragile as you. Now, I'm not talking about 94. If I could be so fragile now, I would be so happy. I think, wow, so many things you were doing and contributing with this fragility. I thought that when you said, you were lucky and unlucky, and I thought, wow, that's true, but you were so much lucky than unlucky. Or what you did with your bad luck is creating such a good luck, for you and for many, many people. So,
Yes, and the public health aspect is important to me, as I think my aunts gave me books about Pasteur and Lister and Koch and Semmelweis. I have that public health orientation. So, as you know, I write books for children in Israel and Gaza and in Ukraine and after 9/11 and in earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, all those books, like the work you did in the landslides and floods in South America, and you and Daniel did, uh, it has had a very high circulation. They're free, but I understand in one venue alone called Academia, over 60,000 copies have been downloaded and apparently used throughout the world. So I'm sure it's a much larger number because not everybody goes to academia to get a guided activity workbook. So it must be hundreds of thousands of people have been helped by this very simple application of child analysis that was intended originally for foster children. As amongst my discoveries, I found it was possible to stop the repetition compulsion of foster children to get themselves ejected and rejected from one home after another. It's remarkable how simply that tendency can be interrupted and brought to zero.
Yes, I'm thinking how interesting is how you make from the most complex things something that you can bring it to a simple way for people to understand and for people to be benefit from. So you are talking in a, from your deep and very, very um, strong expertise, transforming this in a way that could be simple for other people. And that is such an amazing ability that we need to learn how to do. And when you were talking about your book work, I thought maybe it would be helpful if you want to describe these books for people to know what they are. I saw this book and I thought it was amazing, really, really important, and easy for people to work on and very helpful. But do you want to describe how they are?
Well, the simplest one is the first one that I made called My Personal Life History Book. And it is for foster children to fill in a narrative with the help of a parent, a sibling, a birth parent, foster parent, or caseworker. And it is simply my name. I was born in such and such place on such and such a day. And this is a picture of me. And a photograph is put in or a drawing. And this is a picture of people I live with now. And how I got here was, and what happened to me and what I used to do in school. I went to a different school, and this is what the school looked like. And I had a teacher there. The teacher's name was, and my best friend was, and we used to do this and we used to do that. And then the best thing that happened since then, and the worst thing, and let me tell you some of my dreams. And all of this is written down by the child with some help. It can be dictated or just written. And it has been subjected to very good controlled studies. So it's better than 0.0001 significance that it reduces transfers amongst foster homes compared to the untreated children who are carefully matched that don't use the book. And then we found, for example, when there was a hurricane in New Orleans, some of the children were displaced, and we gave them books about the hurricanes. And they had a reduction of the post-traumatic stress disorder indices studied by Baylor University medical students. So we know it works, but it's interesting how difficult it is for non-analysts to apply this low-cost method, because it really gives respect to the minds and the hearts of children, not something easy for people to do.
To help these children to be in contact with what they are, who they are, where are they coming from, what are their relations, the people that they love, the things they do. So it's like helping them connecting with who they are, in a simple way. And this is what we do in psychoanalysis, but you are doing this, helping them in a large scale.
I think it is a very simple seeming method to convert life into a narrative.
You know, I had this feeling that you have so many children and grandchildren doing this. It's like you have a huge population of children from your own that you help that will transmit to their generations what you gave to them. So it's such an amazing work you did for the world. I think it's really impressive. And maybe you want to say something more about something
Well,
before we finish.
I am very moved by you, Adriana, because I hear how much you love the world. And I hear that at our meetings. And I appreciate your responses and resonance with my work. It is true that with these methods of guided activity workbooks and of reflective network therapy, that thousands of children have been helped. And I feel very fortunate that my leadership and inventiveness has been so useful when it was really a painful adaptation in childhood. I was an inventor in childhood. I invented a way to project from a microscope onto a wall an image of protozoa. And I invented a magnetic levitated train that would be suspended above the tracks. And I invented a collapsible nurser when I had my first child. But the best of all, I think, is that that curiosity and desire to change the world for the better through mental activity was sublimated through psychoanalysis. It was, I think, a gift from my children as well. I have raised 5 children. And amongst them, there were many difficulties. One died, but not until he was in his 50s. And he had many developmental difficulties, primordial dwarfism, intellectual problems, speech problems. And I think my whole family became a network to help that child. And I learned from that how love could be in a network and could help a child. And then I was fortunate to have colleagues who understood what we were doing and improved it. People who came from Hampstead, a couple of analysts came from Hampstead to work with me, and they did excellent work, particularly Thomas Lopez, for example, Marion Gedney, and others. And I was fortunate that people took me seriously from childhood on. I was ignored my emotional needs as a child. Nobody realized some of my needs at all. But I think I made up for it later in life.
Well, I think we are very lucky to have you in the world. Very lucky. I think you have so many people, and with your experience, you know, your suffering, and when you didn't feel you were understood, I think develop in you this amazing capacity to understand and to help. So we are so lucky to have you, not only for me, but really in the whole world. I am impressed really of all the stories and how much you went through and the level in which you can sublimate. And not only for you, but for everybody who is close to you. So I want to thank you for that also, not only for the interview, but for the difference you made in the whole world. And I thought, when you were talking about love, I thought, oh, if we had more people talking like this, maybe we would not have wars. Unfortunately, no.
We must learn to love each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yes. And it's very easy to see your love and your passion and your love for the world. And so, well, I wish we can make clones of you and live in a better world. But
Well, thank you so much for your compassionate and evocative interview.